Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not provide therapeutic advice, and listening does not create a client therapist relationship. All views expressed are my own, and any case examples shared have been de identified to protect privacy. If you're seeking personal support, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional in your area. Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. I am your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. Welcome to episode 8, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there. If you're still here, thank you. Appreciate you. How's everyone doing? How are you traveling after another week of connecting with kids and learning through play? We've all had a week. Guys, I am genuinely showing growth here. I'm recording this ahead of time again. I know. It's very unusual for me. Next week, I am in lots of different spaces doing clinic work, doing supervision work, and running workshops. So my next week is super busy, and I wanted to make sure that I did not forget a podcast because I've heard your feedback, and I'm so glad that you guys are enjoying it. Please reach out to us if you've got ideas and suggestions along the way. I'm very excited about this topic that we're going to talk about today. I do need to caveat this by saying I am recording this on the weekend and my children are out and about outside in the yard, and it's a windy day here in Brisbane. We are almost in the throes of spring, but it's turned cold again. So we got excited for a minute that things were getting hotter, and then it's gone cold again. So it is a bit of a dreary afternoon here. And if you hear kids laughing and playing, that is my children. So just caveating that if you can hear noises in the background. All right, with all that being said, today's episode is one that I think is especially useful for our beginning play therapists. And I think when we reflect on the topics of areas of practice that beginning play therapists want to know the most about, one of them is, how do I set up a playroom? And I think when we think about this topic holistically, it can be very overwhelming to consider all of the elements in child-centered play therapy. So I want to caveat and preface this episode, as we are the Play Therapy Circle and we are passionate about child-centered play therapy. That's what this topic is going to be all about, setting up the playroom from the framework and the approach of child-centered play therapy. So what I want to do is cover a few different areas so that hopefully those listening who are asking those questions about how to set up a playroom feel like they've got that knowledge as they leave. So what I would like to begin by talking about is really the purpose of the playroom. So we know that children coming into a therapeutic playroom is very different than them coming home from school in the afternoon and playing in a playroom in someone's home. They are two very distinct, different environments. And so we very much set up our therapeutic playrooms to have intentionality behind the choice of the toys, oftentimes the layout, which we're going to talk about soon, but also acknowledging that the space that we provide has very different functions to just everyday play. And we've talked about in previous episodes, obviously, the power of play and all of its key benefits, so I don't want to diminish any of that. But when we're talking about setting up the parameters of a playroom, It holds a very sacred space in child-centered play therapy where we literally invite children to share their most vulnerable aspects of self, especially in the third stage of play. And so it needs to foster that safety and security when the child walks in. So my message to you from 10 years of private practice now is take your time. Take your time, take a minute to really establish and feel comfortable in your therapy space. That is absolutely key, because if we think about at the absolute core of CCPT and those key tenets being congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard, you can't do that if you're distracted by the layout of your room or if you're distracted by the nature of some of the toys in your room. So every person, I think, when we come to decision making around selection of toys, each CCPT practitioner might be slightly different in terms of that list that we are able to access when we learn this skill, that there might be a couple of things that we do or don't include. And really at the end of the day, what this needs to be about is staying true to our modality, but staying true to the process for both the child and for us. So I know one of those things, and I'm jumping ahead because we're going to talk about categories in a second, but I know one of those things that is often a reflective point is around, say, the inclusion of guns or, say, rope in the playroom. So they're two very different tools, I guess, in terms of their functionality. But when we think about it from a therapeutic context, they both help to support that exploration of feelings, emotions, and experiences. It really then comes down to, is it something that the therapist themselves feels comfortable to be able to stay congruent, accepting, with unconditional positive regard while the child is engaging in that particular resource? And another important reflection in that space is that influence of our capacity to be able to put therapeutic limits in, to be able to respond to the needs of the child in a therapeutic context in CCPT, and what's within our bandwidth as a therapist. So I know that might be a little controversial when we're thinking about our true, purest child-centered play therapy modality application, where the toys that we are advised in our training are a part of the playroom should be included. I want to share, I guess, that point of view that we talk about the relationship between the therapist and the child as absolutely being paramount over the style, the reflective responses, the toys we use in the room. They all come secondary to the establishment of that relationship. So if you as a therapist are distracted or impacted in terms of your congruence when you're in that critical time in the beginning of your relationship with a child due to one of the resources in the room, that obviously then becomes an issue. And so there's so many layers with that we can unpack. And what I want to give the message to everyone listening to this is that I wouldn't be, as a CCPT practitioner, living my core tenets of, and truly I live and breathe this approach, I would not be giving that sense of empathy to you as the therapist in the same way that I do with children if I said to you, you have to have that resource in the playroom. My perspective, coming from, again, a very committed person-centered CCPT framework, is that it's not my job to instruct others, but it's in the way of our belief in that humanistic, person-centered approach to therapeutic intervention with, as I say, children of all ages, and that includes therapists and adults, is this idea that we serve to walk alongside those families and those therapists and those children, all of our community, including our professionals and our colleagues in the field. So I want to extend that heartfelt connection and respect and empathy if you are struggling with some of the resources in your room. And really, the space of clinical supervision and personal therapy becomes part of unpacking that and working through that. But I think I just want to caveat all of this, and I certainly welcome you as a listener, your feedback and reflections in that space, because I know everyone may have differing viewpoints on this, but I don't think we can walk the walk and talk the talk if we don't truly commit to all aspects of CCPT, and that includes having empathy for therapists who might struggle with some of those resources in the room. So what does that mean? I think for many of us, as I said, it's about doing that reflective work in your clinical supervision and in your personal therapy. And if it is ultimately something that for you is difficult to have in the room, and you can have many different reasons for that, I think that's something to take into consideration. So I share with you my challenge in that space, and the only thing I've never had in my playroom is a rope. And I think off the back of everything I just reflected on, I know that there would be practitioners out there that would have it in their room. And in true CCPT commitment to this modality, I see you and I completely respect that. For me personally, it would be something that I would feel uncomfortable with, and having a child engage in, say, a maladaptive way in the playroom using a rope would be challenging for me to stay in those tenets of CCPT. And hey, listen, I've been doing this for 10 years now. I feel very comfortable with my capacity and my ability to put in therapeutic limits. I teach those therapeutic limits to students regularly as well. I have over 20 years working in the counselling field. I don't believe that that is anything specifically to do with my practice, but it is certainly about acknowledging what is going to help me to facilitate a space for the child that is safe, with a freedom of expression and a space that holds boundaries and containment for the child. So I guess I have all of these wafflings. I had intended for this episode to be really short, guys. So I love that I've gone off a tangent. And I'm sure you guys also know this very well now, listening to me long enough that I will do that. But I hope that by having this conversation, and just as the listener, getting you thinking about what is it in the playroom that you welcome on the list of resources that we are required to have in the playroom, and is there anything that would challenge your congruence? And I want to give you permission in that full, as I said before, extension of empathy and unconditional positive regard that I see you, and that is okay. So I don't want to certainly have this podcast be where I am telling you exactly what to do, because as I said before, I am a humanistic, person-centered therapist, so I will never do that. But I do want to offer that facilitative, reflective space. So I hope that was useful in starting the conversation with that, because part of this setting up of the room is considering all aspects of play therapy. So that's the room, that's the child, and that's you as the play therapist as well. You are so important to this process, and you bring so much to the space. So we really want this to be a space where children feel they can talk through those issues and feelings that are important for them. And so what does that look like when we want to facilitate that play? We have different categories of toys. So like I alluded to earlier, I have set up, I was going to say 10,000 playrooms. That's not true. It's been too many. I've lost count. And I think in terms of that setup, you can have a basic structure of the things that you want to include, and they are different categories of toys. So we talk about real life categories of toys. So things like dolls houses, kitchen sets, medical kits, hairdresser kits, all of that good stuff that helps children to play out real life experiences. We have aggressive release toys or aggression toys, and I alluded to some of that just before with guns and rope. We have lots of different things that fall under that category. We have bop bags, we have punching bags, we have handcuffs, we have Nerf guns, we have foam swords. There is a range of resources And for all of these categories, there is not a specific number that you need to tick off to say that you are providing a CCPT room. So again, this is humanistic, person-centered approach to therapy in child-centered play therapy. Make sure that you are including these different categories of toys that fit the space and are congruent for you as well, so that you're able to offer those therapeutic limits when you need, and you are able to stay present and accepting in the space. So those aggressive toys, as I said, there's so many of them. I have Nerf guns in my playroom and I bloody love them. Love them. I know many play therapists out there who would rather never see a Nerf gun in their playroom ever again. And that's okay. How great is our play therapy circle community where we accept each other for who they are and the incredible work that they bring to the play therapy profession. So I want to extend that to all of you listening. Creative, expressive toys. Guys, these are lots of different wonderful things. And again, there are rooms out there in our community that vary in the amount of resources used in this space, and that's okay. We want to just be able to have available some of these creative resources. So things like art supplies, Play-Doh, clay, whether that's puppets, dress-ups, sand tray, whatever that looks like for you in your playroom and what you can fit. I try to, and I'm going to talk about this in a second in terms of the setup, we certainly don't move the toys around very often. The space that I have been in now for quite a while, I recently did kind of a rejig of my room. For those of you in America listening or overseas, I hope that jargon makes sense, but I essentially wanted to reorder the space so that for me, it wasn't distracting, because I was finding that some of the layout of the way that I had it seemed a bit chaotic and a bit messy. That doesn't happen very often, but sometimes you may need to do that as well to make sure that you've got those resources in the space you have available, but that it's set up in a way that's accessible for the kids. So think that all through. Fantasy toys is another space where we have obviously miniatures and things for the sand tray, if in fact you have the space and capacity to do. Animals, soldiers, I think I mentioned that before as well. Things like figurines, yes, different replicas of, say, houses or whatever that looks like. We make sure that we have some of those fantasy type toys that help facilitate that play, especially when kids get into that third stage of play. So I think one of the catchphrases that I always lean into with Gary Landreth, because again, I am so committed to this CCPT approach, that he talks about quality over quantity. This is a big topic because I think that in the beginning, so for those of you who are still here, because I've been talking for now 17 minutes, and this was supposed to be a 10-minute podcast. If you're still here, welcome, thank you. For some of our community, there is pictures of the most incredible playrooms I have ever seen, with just the most intricate detail and inclusion of so many toys. And I see some of those pictures with absolute admiration, but also with quiet curiosity around how does the pick up after a particularly aggressive child in the second stage of play go for you when you have 10,000 toys in your playroom. And of course, they don't have 10,000 toys, right? But we have to obviously make the room functional for the child and for you, especially for the child in their emotional expression. But it really is, guys, quality over quantity. And I really want to emphasize too that when we're looking at these toys, that we're making sure in terms of their conditions that they are durable, they're safe, they're easy to clean. If they break, we're not going to be devastated in the moment. We know that they were a packet of 5 for $10 from Kmart and we can replace them. I think that's important to consider. I think Having clarity in the room as opposed to overfilling is really important. So really thinking through, I want to move into the next concept really around physical layout and design. I think that everyone is going to have their own unique approach to doing this. What I will say is do what works for the room and works for you. And try not to make it too overstuffed or overcluttered. That's really important. So we want to make sure that we have clear boundaries. I think if you are looking to use bookshelves or cubes to display or shelving of any kind, really, there's so many options out there, right? Making sure that it is the toys on those shelves or on those cubes or on those bookshelves are visible for the child and are within easy reach for the child. The other thing I would say from a workplace health and safety perspective as well is if you have any of those things of bookshelves, shelves, or cubes, or whatever that looks like for you, please make sure they're secured to the wall. We just want to make sure in the event that a child attempted to climb up, which we would put a therapeutic limit in immediately for though, right? We just want to ensure safety of children as well. So making sure your shelves are organized and you have designated areas. That's a good place to start, guys. If you want to have an area, designated spot for the aggressive toys, you want to have a spot for creative, expressive toys like the sand tray and the art supplies and the miniatures, great. And then if you want to have another area that has the tent and the dolls and the blankets for more of that safety, security, nurturing, care, connection work, also great. Do what feels right and connected for you. But for those of you starting out, that might be a good starting point. And certainly taking pictures and making sure that you're getting feedback along the way from, say, your clinical supervisor can be really helpful too. Sorry everyone, I just had to take a minor drinks break there, refreshment break, while my daughter decided to stack the dishwasher while mummy's recording a podcast. So apologies, just let her know what I was doing. And thanks, but off you go. All right, so we were talking about physical layout. Very important. So I am talking today, and this episode is all about if you have a private practice or a room that you're renting where you can establish your resources and you can leave them there. I felt like that was important to also clarify because there obviously is scenarios where you might be renting a space only one day a week and you might be bringing a travel kit. That's obviously different. Just to clarify what the purpose of today's conversation is about. Atmosphere in terms of lighting, the colors, sound, they're all really important, guys, to consider as well. So how is the soundproofing going? And if there isn't soundproofing, what steps can you take to make sure that maybe there is? So when I worked from home, when I had a practice and a clinic in the very, very beginning, I would often play background music in my waiting room area to make sure that I could muffle the sound and give us some sense of confidentiality. In our current clinic, we have a beautiful big TV that plays lots of meditation music and beautiful landscape shots to help calm and regulate our beautiful parents and our beautiful families, but also to help dull out the noise as well. So sometimes that sound, consideration of that sound is very helpful. Calming colors. We have beautiful purple walls. I've got this dream and vision at some point that I will renovate one day, and I would love other colors because I think blues and greens are also so calming, right? So they're great colors too. So thinking about those colors, if your therapy room has a bright red wall, I just think about it. I just consider that. I believe there is some research in that space that talks about red being quite an angry, eliciting quite an angry feelings, a concept there. Don't quote me on that, of course. But thinking about the colors in your room are really, really helpful. And obviously the lighting as well. So I've had playrooms where I've had beautiful, different sort of configured light lamps that my husband would wire up and set up for me so that they were safe away from little hands. But things like butterflies and flowers and hearts, lights, they were absolutely gorgeous in our playrooms. So there is lots of different variations to that. But just considering, is the light good and how does that help you navigate the space? Accessibility and safety. I was just talking about that before, you guys. Secure your furniture. That's from my workplace health and safety husband, who is always giving me all of the tips, all of the advice. Child-sized furniture. That goes for your chairs. So I have little tables and little round plastic stools for the kids to sit on when they're using the sand tray or doing their colouring in. So that's always very helpful as well to consider that, and safe storage for materials. If you are going to use, say, cubes with pull-out drawers, a great idea would be to have clear drawers, just again so the kids can see into those drawers. But look, again, it really is by your design, as long as it's accessible for them and that they are toys where they can't hurt themselves in any way. So we wouldn't have some great shaped scissors, right? Unless we're working with older kids. I've never had scissors in my playroom, but I think, again, that's one of those things where we just consider the safety of the kids. And I think we also too need to really recognize, and I do lean into this because I know very traditional CCPT would say things like you can't have boardrooms, you can't have board games in the playroom. How I represent CCPT and make sure I am following CCPT protocol is that I don't instruct the child on how that board game will go. In true Rogerian style, I let the child decide what the rules are, how the game is going to work, how it's played out, and they are always in the lead. So in my mind, it's just another resource in the room. There isn't a prescribed structure to that board game. Certainly, if there are kids that are questioning that, again, I'm returning that responsibility to them to decide for themselves. And so we then get to unpack some of those deeper human capacity issues that the child might be struggling with. So therein lies the therapeutic purpose. So we want to have structure, but we also want to have freedom. So I don't have any particularly prescriptive toys. I still to this day don't have things like Marvel characters or things like that, where I feel like it might elicit, I guess, an expectation around the play and what it should look like for the child. So again, I think there's an invitation in creating your space to have that freedom in your resources so the children can decide what that play will look like for them. I know oftentimes genuinely beginning play therapists want to know exactly that list of toys to include in the playroom based on our CCPT approach. So I want to list a few of them now to you. So those things include things like a doll's house and figurines, sand tray and maybe a shovel and a bucket, punching bags, kitchen, and so all of the kitchen utensils, food, cups, plates, forks, pots and pans. Stuffed animals. So we have a giant teddy in all of our playrooms and always have as a option for redirection, especially for aggressive play. Your big, large teddies, stuffed toys. We'll have things like dolls blankets, a bottle, a brush, feeding utensils, dummies, clothes, handcuffs. Here comes the aggressive toys. Handcuffs, swords, guns, rubber knives, Nerf guns, masks and rope, dress up toys, a phone, more real life toys like cars, tractors, ambulance, police cars, helicopters, medical kits, cash registers, a large bouncy ball, which I really enjoy having in my playrooms, animal figurines, farm animals, snakes, dinosaurs, and other zoo animals, puppets, musical instruments, soldiers and all things related to soldiers, building blocks, Play-Doh, we might have paints, brushes, a water cup, paper, we've got crayons, pens, pencils, paper, maybe sticky tape or glue. We've got obviously that toy food I talked about before, a table and chairs. We might have a blackboard if you're so inclined. We have a tent and blankets and pillows in that tent. We have board games. We might have a chair, depending on whether or not we want to, a mat on the ground, and you might have a clock and maybe some of those other creative resources like building materials, other things that are functional toys like hammers, etc. So that is just a list and it's not exhaustive, but I give that to you as well for those beginning play therapists out there who are considering what toys they'd like to include in their playrooms. So what I want to remind you before I close out is this idea of you as the therapist and the presence that you play as part of the environment in the playroom. That was a really long sentence, and I realized I probably needed to cut that down. So let me try that again. Your presence as part of the environment in the playroom. So what do I mean by that? There is so much to consider in this space, including your role. Your role is to facilitate that space where they feel seen and heard. As Gary Lynch would say, I hear you, I see you, I understand, and I care. That is our core belief as child-centered play therapists. So in that role, we are offering that safe, nurturing, trusting, held space for children to heal. So our role is really, really important. Our tone of voice and our consistency, especially in our reflections and our therapeutic limits, shape the environment as much as the physical space. I am going to share a really quick, very much de-identified example, guys, to protect the confidentiality of the clients that I work with, either previously or currently. But I had an experience of a joint play therapy session not long ago. And what I will share from the trenches of that, and truly, sibling play therapy work is not for the faint-hearted, guys. Not for the faint-hearted. So I noticed in that space that the children who attended came in very dysregulated, very aggressive. So I spent probably 3/4 of my session just regulating them. And so what I noticed was, again, that my presence in the playroom, in staying calm and accepting, but holding really important and defined limits of the space, actually helped regulate them over the course of the session, to the point that we were able to join together in play by the end, and we were laughing together. So I share that very, very brief example because I think that we take for granted how much we as the therapist help facilitate that felt presence of safety and connection in the room. I can't really describe it any other way. I feel like maybe you guys listening out there might have a better description for it. But I almost want to say it's really that kind of psychodynamic lens that I'm leaning into now, guys, of that real, that space in the room where you can feel that you are very important in helping hold that space for them to be able to work through the things that they're struggling with. I go off on tangents, you guys, but I hope that helped. So what are we doing as in our role as well is maintaining that warmth, acceptance, and predictability. I feel like I've talked about that a lot, so I won't labor on that point. And we're also looking for those small cues. So things around both ourself and in engaging with the child in terms of our own voice. So I talked about before tone, but just in our natural sort of mode of communication, in that verbal expression, how we are doing that and how we're communicating that, where we're sitting. So again, I know that there is different variations in our CCPT space around whether you would sit on a chair or sit on the ground. For me personally, and guys, this is where I give you that invitation to feel seen and heard as a part of our play therapy circle and a CCPT practitioner in our community. For me, psychodynamically, I really recognize that power differential if I was to sit on a chair and a child was to be playing on the ground. And so for me, that feels uncomfortable. So I would rather sit on the floor with the child to communicate both verbally and non-verbally to the child, I'm with you. We are in this together. We are on the same level. Again, looking at where you're sitting, your openness and your nonverbal communication is just as important as the space that you provide. So we have talked, guys. Let me do a time check. Holy moly, it's 33 minutes. I apologize in advance. This was going to be a 10-minute podcast. However, for those of you listening, I hope that this has been helpful and useful. We've really covered today those toys and categories of toys in the playroom. And I read through a bit of a list as well for your reference. We've talked about the environment and the layout and the physical space. And we've also talked about our therapeutic presence as the therapist and how important that is too. So if you are a beginning play therapist listening and I've completely overwhelmed you with more information, I apologize. I hope that this has been helpful. But if you are starting to set up, please give yourself permission to take a little bit of time, but don't overthink it. Do and feel that you can adapt and update as you go along, but start small and choose quality over quantity and choose a few toys from each of the categories we talked about and really focus on providing that safe, consistent, supportive space for children to be seen and heard and held in the playroom. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. I have a suspicion that my husband has just arrived home from work, which is wrap up time for me. And look, I have been talking for way too long anyway. Hey, thanks for your support. Thanks for listening today. I am so grateful for everyone who is following along. And as I always say, please, if you want to drop us a message on our Instagram account at the Play Therapy Circle podcast or want to get in touch, please feel free to reach out. We would love to hear from you. I'm excited for next week, you guys. We're going to cover our first skill in child-centered play therapy around reflecting emotions and reflecting feelings in the playroom. It's going to be a great one. Probably not going to keep to my 10 minutes. I'm just going to probably set that expectation now. I don't think that's going to happen. Look, I've got a really crazy, hectic, busy week ahead, but I am so incredibly grateful to be able to say that I wake up every day and am a CCPT practitioner. I'm so bloody grateful. And I'm so bloody grateful that you have all been here today and listened with me. Hey, go look after yourselves and each other. And thank you so much for your support. And I'll catch you again next time. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.